All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming along. It's been a really interesting conference, I think. I just love the plateau of design that everybody's been speaking on. Hopefully you guys have been inspired, and we hope to just give you some background of how we think about vehicles and the opportunities for app development. Obviously, where user experience is going in the vehicle. My name is Paresh Hanna. I'm the Global Director of Human-Machine Interface. Very heavy design, UX kind of component design. So everything you interact with inside the vehicle, physical and digital, I have a lot of responsibility and influence on those things, from the software to the steering wheels to buttons, controls, function, and content distribution, and so forth. I've been with Ford for almost 3 years. I've got an industrial product design, graphic design, and then went on to advanced degrees in psychology and human learning and so forth. So I feel like I fit in with this crowd for sure. And, I've been designing hardware and software and brands and multi-channel experiences and lots of telephones and tablets and gadgets and so forth over the years. So it's interesting to come to a place where lots of things are colliding. And, they're colliding at a speed of, say, 70 miles an hour at the same time. So I liked KK. I think he kept saying, remove the distraction. And we live in a world of everything's distracted. And if you are distracted, you travel a great length while you're distracted, at a high speed most of the time. So we'll talk a little bit about that. That's me, Sudipto.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Sudipto Aich. I'm actually located in Palo Alto. Ford Research and Advanced Engineering a couple of years back kind of put together this lab. And in my past, I've worked with Paresh and his team on several HMI related projects. I've had a pretty mixed experience within the company. Particularly here, me along with my team. We manage Ford's kind of open innovation platform, including our interaction with collaborators in the broader industry, but also with DIYers, makers, students, university, all together. So pretty broad shoulder in that sense, and then being in Palo Alto provides a very unique mix of knowing all these things that are very Ford heavy in terms of HMI and the 70 mile per hour distractions that we deal with, talk about day to day. But being here, we also are very cognizant of kind of the mobile revolution, all the things that are great in the valley, and trying to find the great intersection between these two worlds.
So we're going to just get into it and hopefully leave a lot of open-ended conversation and time for Q&A. I just want to give you some background around human-machine interface and how we view our mission and evolving physical and digital frameworks. What's interesting and particularly relevant to this conversation is the framework itself. How open should they be? How closed should they be? How forced should they be? How married to the vehicle should they be? And so forth. And maintaining that sense of community and opportunity is paramount. I think we've talked a lot about structured and created experiences and mapping technologies and enablers and putting a design lens to them. The question is, where is that total unpredictability and uncertainty and the things that you guys will design and create and conceptualize that we have no idea, that might actually change our industry. So I think that's the opportunity at hand. Next slide. I apologize for turning around, but we basically see it. It's multi-screen, it's multi-user. Folks are going to bring in their devices. They're going to expect their digital identity to come with them, their content, their networks, and so forth. The question is, what do we do with that? How do we distribute it? How do we control it to some degree? The majority of people actually drive with their phones on their laps, when they drive. So the other large group of them put it in the cup holders, and it faces them. And 1% of people actually put it out of sight. So, it's a force to be reckoned with, and it's definitely going to influence everything we do. I think the comment was made earlier that we're addicted to being busy, and I think a lot of folks have also alluded to we're addicted to lots of displays. Maybe Yves Bahar yesterday said there's something about this just doesn't seem right, but we see this all the time, right? This is just your typical taxi driver with 6, 7 screens, and you know, if you ask them which one's most vital, all of them are equally vital. So, you know, how do you basically look at this visual noise, cognitive noise, audio noise, and so forth, and you know, distribute and control the environment? So, thanks. This has also been alluded to a lot, I think, during the conference. I'm designing for upgrades, right? And I'm designing for a product that is going to live a lot longer. Our vehicles today are on the road for an average of 11 years. So what do you do with a system that came out 11 years ago? How do you make things retroactive? You have a certain amount of sensors, you have a certain amount of displays, you've got an architecture, you've got processing speed, and so forth. How do you balance all of that? And what is this level of expectation for consumers? Because that's also growing and growing and growing, right? Everybody that has a smartphone is getting upgrades. They're keeping it fresh. What does design for fresh mean? You know, and I think that's where we talk about where the opportunities are to contribute to what that definition means, right? In the context of our interior experience. In the design of the vehicle and the interior, we take a very cyclical, user-centered, iterative process approach, right? A lot of discovery, a lot of understanding, a lot of immersion into people's worlds, into their cars, into the ecology of their cars, and what they think about it, the decisions they make around it, how they interact with others, what they do in it themselves, and so forth. And then we, you know, build strategic frameworks. We figure out what we want to be known for. We figure out what technologies are going to go in, and then we prototype and iterate and so forth. So feedback loop, car goes out, and then the question is upgradability and you know, this lifetime value and history of freshness for the vehicle. Next one. Oh yeah, sorry. So I mentioned distraction, and this is interesting. Has anybody in the room seen this before? So there's a lot of studies that just track at different universities, National Highway Safety Transportation Authority, you know, around distraction in a car, in a truck, and what people are inclined to do, right? Again, we spend a fair amount of time in the vehicles every day, some commutes longer depending on region and urban and rural. We sit in traffic a lot. You know, we vary our speeds, but we're, again, inclined to be productive, inclined to be doing things, you know. We think of maybe the car as a space where I can't even complete the task that I might have started at home or started at work, right? And things are starting to flow together. They're just continuous. So, you know, talking and listening, drinking and eating, changing your music sources, plugging and unplugging, reaching for objects, reading papers. You know, for many years I rode the Chicago train into town from the suburbs, and we would stop and it runs along the highway, and you just watch people. They'd read entire books. Every day one guy would be reading the Financial Times while cruising at about 20 miles an hour, and I think we definitely saw some of those images, right? And I'm going to pick out Peter because he had such a good presentation on autonomous driving and where things are going and the sensors, right? But a big part of it was being aware of the driver, right? What the driver expects and so forth and what they're doing. An interesting, I think it was one of your slides, had the paper in front of the you know, in a coffee, or maybe the person's sleeping. But depending, if you open a paper, you block all the cameras and the sensors, and we can't keep track of what the driver's doing. So we can never control that, right? We have people chasing animals. I think if you look at, we assume that everybody straps their kids in the back of the car and has a car seat and everything's nice and tidy, but if you're on the streets of Mumbai and it's a firstborn son, they pretty much have the run of the vehicle. If they want to shift the vehicle or even do the steering, they'll just jump at it. So we see some crazy things. And then beyond that is texting. So 23 times more dangerous than anything on this page is texting. And texting is habitual, right? If you put a 16-year-old that sends 4,000 texts a day in a vehicle and tell them you'll pay them $200 to drive 5 miles and not send a text, and tell them there's cameras on there in the car and everything else we're watching, they're unable to do that. And they think they do it, but they don't do it, right? So that's even the stranger part, is this, it's an extension of who I am. It's just how I talk and communicate. I've got it placed here. It was placed here when I left the drive and when I came back, but at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, you sent a text and you didn't even realize it. So a lot of companies doing studies like that and really looking at it, and the question is, how do we accommodate these things? How do we, these changes in patterns of behavior, these inclinations of people, and also this growing sense that if I can do this safely, I can probably do a little more, right? And I can use this space. On the flip side, if you go to the next slide, it's what is this changing dynamic and what are the inputs? And it's basically the next multifunction device at this point, right? Any application, any content source, any functional component, any brand experience, and what are these filters? And then not to mention over time, we talking about her was interesting, right? The human learning and the aspects of adaptation and prediction and anticipation, right? And doing things on your behalf. So we think a lot about warnings. We think a lot about turning things on, turning things off. We think a lot about new useful pieces of information and new pieces of function that will augment your life and actually allow you to live the life you want to live through the vehicle. And then, how to build that relationship over time just through the ownership and loyalty experience and so forth.
I was also going to add that, in the previous slide, the thing that really jumps out to me is not all interactions are bad for you, right? So, like talking to the passenger, for example, was found to be better than just driving, and these are the kind of findings that are also helpful when you're trying to design, new interactions where some of these features can provide a positive surrogate, for how people drive, how engaged they are, whether they're distracted or not. So, it's kind of a very, large span of things, and so to me that's really interesting.
So when we talk about the types and pieces of the vehicle, and then even principles, I think we've heard a lot of principles, so I won't spend too much time here, but we're really striving towards a level of simplicity, right? Where let's start at a base level where usability is the cost of entry, right? That should be the norm in product design and experiential design at this point, and then it's where do you find that sense of wonder, right? Against to KK talking about movies, it's the same with a product interactive experience, especially one that you pay a lot of money for and you spend a lot of time in and you're very reliant on, right? So I think all the principles we've heard, whether it was Bob Bruner and others, were spot on. It's more than the product and so forth. For us, we start at this level of just simplicity, clarity, intuitiveness, and you guys have the good fortune of hearing me talk again later this morning before lunch to the wider audience, but I'll show some of the bad habits, right, that have existed now and still exist and are across every OEM in the industry. And then, from an application point of view and the things that we're able to affect and the things, again, that we design and think about every day, this is a, Lincoln MKZ sketch interior. And these are just some of the technologies and elements, from buttons and switches to everything on the digital displays to the content and function distribution, to what does it mean to have memory or voice and gesture, rear seat entertainment, all these kinds of things. So when we talk about app integration, it goes far and wide through the vehicle and has a lot of opportunity. That said, we do a lot of testing, right? We have probably 10 international simulators of different scale. The one in the upper left has actually got a vehicle inside it, and it rotates in multiple axes. But we build components, we build virtual cars, we put them on roads, and we do a lot of kind of emotional quantification, distraction testing, raw usability, and so forth, right? To kind of increment our way into prototypes. And then beyond this, we build prototype cars and we put them on the road, we drive them in closed courses and so forth. And that's an interestingly new paradigm, I think. There's always been the simulators, but one thing we've advocated, particularly in Silicon Valley and here, is putting these cars on the road and modifying them and and doing significant testing and observation with them in both longitudinal and very task-based and so forth kind of structures. And then there's just a myriad of topics to consider, and I just grabbed a few here, around anticipation and prediction, mode changes, physical and digital interaction. I think one of the most interesting aspects today is around input. So Ford has always been really big on voice, but to all the discussions earlier this morning, the voice has to be perfect. It has to be very human. If it doesn't work once, you're not going to use it. Folks with different speech patterns and so forth may have troubles, but it continues to progress, and that's the important thing. Release after release, upgrades. It's software that can be improved continuously. And then on the flip side, it's just accommodation of the stuff that I bring into the car, and how do I store and how do I get comfortable, and my creature comforts and my entertainment and my safety. So this is kind of a mantra in my design world of just making things, right? We're going to make things. We're at the heart, we are makers, we are modelers, we are prototypers, and I liked the discussion around failing often and recovering and so forth, but we do experience modeling, we do deep synthesis of cultural, socioeconomic issues, but in the end we make things that are a reflection of that, right? And at Ford, we're fortunate, I think, to cover many continents and many vehicle category types. So I think we'll show you a slide that covers the entire range of our vehicle opportunity here, from small cars to trucks to luxury vehicles and so forth. So agnostic platforms.
Yeah, so I mean, specific to kind of like prototyping, right? So as we generate these ideas and these concepts, one thing that has been kind of traditional to automotive companies are these ideas and iterative prototyping cycles are very insular. Like, you usually have a bunch of engineers and designers that are within the companies that have been working on this. And this is interesting because this is known as the von Hippel curve. There's the MIT Sloan professor called Eric von Hippel, and he kind of outlined this curve of the number of users that are perceiving the need, and in the very early segment, only lead users prototypes are available, and they are the ones who are kind of pioneering these new ideas, these new innovations, these new prototypes, right? It's only later on that the commercial version of these products become available. From Ford's standpoint, what we usually try to do is, we are constantly discovering new innovation markets, new potential ideas, and only once they reach a certain level of infancy, we try to implement them globally, because as Parrish kind of pointed out, this is a long iterative cycle of 11-year worth of car ownership. So we need to know things to much more greater detail. So with that being said, what this curve kind of talked about, there's a traditional manufacturer-centered innovation, and then there's this whole user-centered, more democratized innovation paradigm, right? That gets introduced if you can enable that first part of that curve, right? So as an automotive company, we started looking into this and said, users can actually out-innovate manufacturers. I mean, if you look at traditional examples of computing in general, right? Like, look at what mobile platforms have kind of done. Like, anybody can write an app, and you can potentially have $1 million to $1 billion business that you can generate. The idea was to kind of understand these user needs, those who are specifically ideating, innovating around them, and kind of enable them. What that eventually led to was the creation of this particular platform that we at Ford internally kind of put together. The idea was to create this open source platform, which we use for rapid prototyping, both internally, but also when we work with external partners and external DIYers and makers. And particularly, why is there a need for that, right? If you go back, the old 1966 Mustang, right? What does a tinkerer's space mean in the old cars, right? You swap out carburetors, you put in new parts, you get under the hood of the car. There are things that you can modify. Tinkering back in the day meant something completely different to what we have today, which is these things are inaccessible. Like, you can't open up a car and just swap out parts. They have more computing. They're more computer-driven modules that are interoperable, but it's not meant to be for users to tinker with, right? And if you contrast that to where computers have gone, they've kind of had the completely opposite shift, right? Where something which was very, very inaccessible has now become very accessible, right? So with that kind of viewpoint in mind, what we tried to do was we said, let's create kind of this real-time, to start with read-only, but data which is beyond diagnostic, right? A lot of you folks, and for those who don't know about this, there's this thing called the onboard diagnostic port that somewhere after 96 is a standard kind of like a port in every car that is manufactured across manufacturers. It's usually used for when you get those emergency light or check engine light on your car. That's what mechanics usually plug a device in and kind of read the codes. But those diagnostic ports have a lot more interface for Ford cars specifically, knowledge of a lot of other data that's inside the car. We as Ford engineers had this unique possibility that we could create this like platform where we had this proprietary knowledge, but we could expose that proprietary knowledge and data through this mean, right? And the data format is completely open source. The platform itself is completely open source. And overall, this is about the data, right? It's not just about the apps. The focus of the team here is to not generate a product, right? It's to enable, going back to the Von Hippel curve, right? Those early innovators and user-centered innovation, right? What you do with it is what is up to your own creativity and innovation. But this was kind of an example of where we kind of abstracted the complexity of what signals reside within the car and kind of make it, like name, vehicle speed, and there's a value, right? Like things like JSON. And then we tried to put different layers of tools and software that kind of enable and help people to prototype. I mean, and I'm going to go through some of this real quick. So we have things like trip analyzers. Again, it uses OpenStreetMaps. You can record a trip file. You can get this dongle, and it collects all the data, and then you can see how you drove. You can see how your fuel consumption was at each turn, each curve. Again, the entire thing is open source. This is another interesting example of we had a new employee, right? And it's kind of an interesting use case. When new employees start within a car company, it's a pretty big, the idea that you are now going to start doing things with car, it takes you months or years at a time to figure out the internal architecture before you can really make some valuable, tangible products. This is an example of within a span of 2 months, a new employee, fresh out of college, was able to say, look at shift knobs, right? Shift knobs have kind of looked at this like, they're kind of round, they have like more grips and more curves, but that's kind of it, right? What is the smart behind a shift knob, right? And what he ended up doing was, he ended up creating this like 3D printed like shift knob, which basically vibrates. So for manual shift cars, if you are learning how to drive a manual transmission, it'll give you haptic feedback to tell you shift up or shift down. It'll even show you on the LED little display like where you can shift up. And these are all his ideas, not necessarily what we are saying how it needs to be implemented in cars, but it creates this like ecosystem where ideas can be put together, can go beyond just ideation into a physical prototype that can be shared within a larger community within the company. And what we do with that's the interesting next step for us as we get more and more of this idea. We share it with people like Parrish and his group and kind of work out of which one of these features are what our users really want. But this enables you to kind of rapidly prototype. The other thing I was going to add was, this is another example where we internally developed this like old school retro gauge. The idea was, retro gauges gauges are usually very embedded in the car. This guy wanted to make like a really old school needle moving like a retro gauge. It was internally developed almost 1.5 years back. A year later, someone from the community took that project up and kind of made a different version of the same retro gauge, which was a blue LED kind of indicator. So what he did was, this is kind of a tachometer. So as you press on the gas, the LED lights go back and forth. But he had like some other smarts to it about fuel economy, about just like visual cues and so on and so forth. But this is where we are taking internally developed ideas and we are taking them to the community and externally ideating them. What it's also doing is, Ford as a company is extremely interested now in the overall scope of mobility, beyond all the features and functions that we are making in cars. A platform like that is globally enabling challenges, right? So we put together 8 global challenges with 8 different teams globally for people to build applications on. This was all hosted on Challenge Post. Now, if I go back a couple of years, for these people to make vehicle level applications, there is no tools for them to ideate or prototype against, right? So what this platform basically did was enable that experience of where people could finally start making applications and kind of putting them under this Challenge Post. And we at Ford, we look at all these challenges, all these applications coming from all these global markets, and then evaluating them as to which one of these applications or features are really interesting if we need to put them in a car or put them in a context of productionizing it over a 11-year cross-platform product lifecycle, right? And how do we manage them? So that was kind of the overall gist. These interfaces are kind of key to how to get the data out of the car. The interesting part is there are a bunch of these available in, a lot of people make it. We have a completely off-the-shelf assembled version that you can just buy parts and assemble it yourself. You can also request one online, but then you can also buy a couple of partner dongles. And then, things that you guys might have already known. What we basically are trying to do is tap into the CAN network. We're trying to reduce the redundancy and the confusion around what a message is. So rather than having these detailed bits kind of flying, all you see is vehicle speed or torque at transmission or simple things. So we are making the car essentially more accessible. And this is kind of a great example of, this is a sports car, right? Where bits are kind of mapped very differently in the CAN side of how we have it versus a family car where things are tracked very differently. But if you're a developer, all you care about is the right-hand side, right? So these little things are really enabling people who are interested in making car-level innovations and applications to pick this up and kind of ideate and go from there. And yeah, we have a broad level of vehicle support, and this is, I think, what Barish was talking about. So we are not just focused in the North America market. We have terrific use in markets in Australia. Developing markets specifically pose a very different challenge. So for all the high-end features that we can put in cars like Lincolns and the more up-to-date cars here, markets in Indonesia, markets in China, and China is maybe coming along, but some of these markets are way behind in terms of the technology that's available to them even this year. So this kind of platform lets these other markets and people residing in these other markets to identify local needs and ideating on these local needs, and together bringing them up in this global kind of platform and portfolio where we can then look at it as a company, as experts and designers, and use them as good case points of conversation and say, I don't know why, but for some reason we got 7 of these applications on car sharing or ride sharing or some other application from this particular region, and what does that inform us in terms of like a car company or doesn't. So that's kind of the broad overview. And
yeah, I think those sensitivities based on geographical region or lifestyles that you live, age groups in particular, it definitely, those are trends and understanding that even come in, and those areas of interest definitely affect what we even consider, in the mainstream component design, right, and the large scale of vehicle configurations and dynamics in the vehicle. So, and again, as you can imagine, it's a strong internal tool, even for all of our developers to prototype and iterate as we build, between car shows and interactive, we call them glamour bucks that are fully interactive and things like that. So you might see the interior styling, exterior, plus a focus on what people think needs to be fixed or what can significantly be enhanced. So again, the thread of the conference, of doing more with what you have, or realizing opportunities, or making, a shifter or a gauge or a steering wheel or temperature units or something like that,
Right.
easier to use and
Yeah.
enhanced.
And the interesting thing is, as we ever, I think there's a unique statistic of every car that we make, there's 1 million cars on the road already. So as much as we are a forward-thinking company with all these new things, as all manufacturers are, we're also extremely, curious, and we want to also understand all these other cars and what do we do with them. So what this platform does is also serves those who have Ford cars or any other car, and they have ideas and they want to see them in new cars, and how do we kind of bridge that gap. So I think with that, we have like 5 or some minutes. Maybe we'll open it up for Q&A.
Sure. Behind you. Right there, yeah, hey.
Hi. So at the beginning of the talk, you spoke a little bit about design for upgrades. I'm wondering if you can speak more about that. So, for instance, how might my HMI experience change after I've bought the car?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think this is that expectation level and that perception and expectation that's going to happen, right? I think we quickly, it'll be interesting to see with other software companies as they kind of come into vehicles and bring, off of your phone, the cloud access and the knowledge and understanding and the dynamic change, or versus, putting a modem in the vehicle and just being able to dynamically update things based on a service you might want to use or a pattern of behavior that you have over time. I think actually Tesla is a great example, right, of, and even the conversations, again, I think it was maybe Yves Bahar said, we sent an upgrade out and it doubled the battery time, or it increased the processing speed. We can optimize the hardware and the computing power at the same time as we can enhance just functionality and content types and access and so forth. I think whether it's really nice brand statements. I mean, I look at something like a Tesla where one day you walked up and I think the door handle was already out and you approached it and opened the door versus it's recessed and it comes out at you, or something changes in the way your fuel consumption is communicated to you. That's a big one for us, obviously. I think it's a kind of core pillar of continued improvement of just driving dynamics and fuel efficiency, and how does that vary, and how do we even educate people on certain things? I think the education piece is really critical, just in features, because there's so many features, and the vehicle's still in a space where you understand most of them, but not all of them. And again, we sit people in cars and have them fold their arms and tell us what everything does in the car and gauge the accuracy, and see what we have to fix. And those fixes will be, interestingly dynamic. And right now, it's features and functions and some hardware capabilities, but I think over time, it'll be interesting if like a button actually changes its meaning and things like that, right? And you decide something else, or I want to download some sort of bit of information for a certain journey type that I have planned, or I've never been somewhere and I want to learn more information of it and have it come to me during the drive, things like that. Lots of possibilities.
You mentioned all this data being read-only. Do you have any plans to open up the interfaces so that you can actually push data into the system, maybe reconfigure it, create an alternative interface on another device, and stuff like that, so I can actually control vehicle parameters?
Yeah, so I think this is a question we get quite often, right? And I think the desire of the platform, I mean, over time, I could see that happen. I think the challenges that are currently there with it is, these cars come with a certain warranty, right? And you may be trying to do the right thing, but any misstep in terms of how you interact with the car could potentially have other consequential effect in just the parts, right? And this is where I think as time progresses, the read-only part is a good segue for us to kind of kickstart this, right? But over time, I could see maybe there are certain things that do not impact safety in any way that people can control, right? But this is kind of something we are talking about internally and trying to strategize around it.
Yeah, I was wondering, is the vehicle data, is that specifically sourced from the engine, or can you take information from the interior, measurements about the interior, or even external sensors that are outside the car? Is that something can be expandable? Because it sounds like it's a standard that you set amongst all the car manufacturers.
So a couple of questions there, right? So the first part was the platform definitely gets data from multiple computer modules that are within the car. I mean, for engine, there's a computer module that controls the engine parameters. There's one for transmission, so on and so forth. The way to look at it, rather than looking at it from where it gets the data from, anything. So the car has its internal kind of communication broadcasting system. We call it the controller area network. So anything that's broadcasted over CAN can be exposed through this API. So it's kind of that strategy more than identifying particular modules at a time. And then your other question of whether it's extensible to other sensors, I think we are only constrained with the sensors that are on CAN are Ford installed, right? But we have also had examples of where people have made their own buttons, right? And they want to, every time they push the button, they want to maybe hear how much their current fuel economy is, right? And maybe there's a speaker. So you can definitely do a lot more in terms of both I/O, right? Like you can add more sensors, you can extend it, but then I don't know what all those use cases are. But the platform itself is very extensible. And I think you had a third point about if it's kind of a open source scheme for like all manufacturers. I mean, right now we are kind of constraining this for Ford vehicles because that's who we represent. But over time, it could be kind of an open source standard across all manufacturers. It could end up having its product tail. It could have multiple ways, and I think the team itself can pivot based on what we see and observe from user needs. Yeah, I think we kind of got the sign to kind of wrap up. Maybe one last question, or okay.
You pick up.
Sure.
First, I think you should really be applauded for having gone through the effort of creating an open platform. You really are going to spur a lot of innovation. I hope it comes to benefit you specifically. And I can see very interesting how you could kind of make the car work better, but you could also use this eventually, I think, to make working in the car better. So I work for Intuit. We have 60% of our small business customers actually work out of their cars during the day, one point or another, particularly 4x50 trucks. And being able to interface effectively, not just displaying things, but also sensing things, I think could make the work experience, hopefully when you stop the car, but still much better.
Right. Oh yeah, and I think the one thing that also is very evident, right, as we go from different regions, but we also go from different kinds of customers, those that are in fleet versus those that are business travelers in a certain region. I mean, the use cases vary tremendously, right? And I think Parish also pointed out that with all these simulator testing and things that we do globally, I mean, it's just enormous to understand all these edge challenges, unique cases, and so on and so forth. And and one of the hope is to identify these challenges, these opportunities, and really learn from them, right? So for us internally, that's what the big mantra is for the platform. And in essence, if it can motivate other innovation, I think that's a great outcome.
Yeah, it's an interesting evolution for us, and it's almost one of bandwidth and execution level, right? We're focused very much on entertainment and straight safety and driver's assistance and communication, right? We know people want to make a phone call, they want to listen to the music of their choice, and they want to get from point A to point B, so navigation. But when it comes to health and wellness or productivity or just even something whimsical and fun, we count on these tools to kind of bring those ideas, right? We'd much rather spend all of our time on those fun things, but we have to make a highly functional, usable, vehicle. So,
all right. Thank you, everyone.